Well, good evening, everybody. To those of you who don't join us normally because you don't come this far north, I'm glad you're here now. For those of you that can't make the trek north, thank you for being here. Trying something a little different, trying some new venues, trying to meet people where they're at, get some new people in the doors. So we appreciate your flexibility with us. I've been to a few meetings here at Email Club, and it's always a pleasurable experience. Very old building, really lovely. So I hope you appreciate the history. As Gabriel said, one of our amazing interns, my name is Jane Herring. I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Orange County. Just a reminder that we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We always have been. What this means is that we do not necessarily endorse anything that any of our speakers say. Doesn't mean we don't, but we don't do it officially, of course. But we are a nonprofit, and the important part about that is that we do rely on donations, sponsorships, and memberships to bring you programming like this. So if you're not already a member, please consider joining. If you're a member and would like to get more involved, we always have committee slots open. We could always use a sponsor for a program or a gala or lots of other ways that we can work with you to create a memorable partnership. On that note, just a little bit more about who we are. Most of the people have been to most of our events before, which is wonderful. But again, we have been around since around 1918, not our council, the Council of America. Our council was formed in the 60s and officially in 1978. But our mission is 100% just keeping our community engaged with the world. So if you have any requests, what kind of program you'd like, what kind of topics to cover, we'd be happy to hear those. In the meantime, I'd like to call up our chairman, Mr. Rick Putnam, to introduce our speakers tonight.
Thank you, Jane. And just before I do so, I just wanted to point out one effort of ours, which is over the past years, we've really been ramping up our outreach to Orange County youth in general, high schools in particular, but obviously we have some great interns here from local colleges. But in the back of the room, there is a sponsorship package for Academic World Quest. So that's our signature high school event, which happens every March, which is basically a quiz bowl competition if you're not familiar with it. And last year, our Orange County World Affairs Council sponsored High School El Dorado, took second place in the national competition back in Washington, D.C. So this is a really great effort that we're involved with. We want you to be involved in it. If you can be generous enough to donate some funds, those funds will be directed just to that program. So please make those materials available to you in the back.
Hello.
Hello.
So we're going to have some fun today. This is a real narrow stage. I have to stand some distance from the edge, and then I'll sit down, okay? So you guys don't have to worry about me falling. Thank you all for being here. I want to point out that this is not just a discussion between the three of us, okay? This is a dialogue with the audience. It means that you have Q&A note cards on your tables, I think, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And the interns will be going around picking them. I'd like to have an interactive session, so we're not going to wait till the end for the questions. If you have a question, write it down, write it legibly, and put your name down. Unless you don't want your name used, I may ask you to stand up when I ask a question, or I may not, just depend on how the flow goes. Okay? Tell me, other people here, this conversation is going to be about India. Other people here who know little or nothing about India, everybody don't be shy, raise your hand. We want to be sure that we start at that base level. All of you know India? Good. No? Okay. All right. So, we're going to do some basic stuff first. You know which is the most populous country in the world?
Yes.
That's only because China lost 15 million people during the pandemic. Okay, so it's not an accomplishment on India's part by any means. A large population is sometimes more of a weight than an asset. Okay, please sit down. My friends here are the experts on their subjects. So we will start out the discussion with them. And I met Rafiq first in Palo Alto, and he was associated with a little school up there called Stanford. And then he made the right decision to move to the better part of California. And we are so grateful that he is with the RAND Corporation. Now, how many of you don't know what the RAND Corporation is? Everybody knows? Okay, so you know. Oh, you don't. Okay, so if you know, everybody thinks that Elon Musk invented the Hyperloop, right? Well, he didn't. Okay, the Hyperloop concept was developed at RAND many years ago. And I think the first spacecraft concept was developed at RAND. So they've done some amazing work over the last 60, 70 years. And they do have some focus on what the State Department used to call the Asia Pacific. In fact, everybody called it the Asia Pacific, right? We know that term. But somewhere, at some point in time, I think the State Department decided to use a different term. Okay? And now the official name is the Indo-Pacific. So the Indo-Pacific extends from the shores of Africa all the way to the United States. Right? So the Pacific and the Indian Ocean put together. You can imagine why they might have chosen that nomenclature. Okay? I think it has something to do with a country that you're all familiar with, whose name begins with C. Right? We won't get into the specifics of that just yet. But Rafiq, you want to speak briefly, just one or two sentences about your current work.
Sure. So at RAND, I'm in charge of business development for India, apart from other responsibilities. So I get a good look through frequent visits to India to understand the thinking of policymakers, the general public, the analyst community. It's very easy to do that in India. If those of you who are interested meeting high-level policymakers, they're very open to it. Hello, better? Okay. So as I was saying, India is an easy place to learn from. One is the languages, English, everyone would be speaking English. The second aspect is that over the last 20 years, ever since India exploded nuclear weapon or tested a nuclear weapon in 1998, the United States has taken the view that India is a long-term strategic partner for America. And so when you go in now, compared with the 1980s and the early 1990s, and I lived in India and dealt extensively with bureaucracy and government. It's a completely different attitude now. It's much more welcoming of the US. They have witnessed the benefit of partnership with the US. So there's a certain base there of relationships that have been built up over the years. It's a very talented set of ambassadors has helped from the US to India, have helped lay the ground for the relations. Most recent being Garzetti, before I came, just Richard Dorman. Yes?
I'm sorry, but I'm really having difficulty hearing, and I don't know what the solution is.
So what I had said so far was that India is an easy place, including for Americans to visit and to learn about its thinking on policy issues. Not that India and the US always agree. There are many areas where they don't. One of them is what should India's role be in the world?
So let me stop you right there for now. We'll get into that, just for people to know who you are. Yeah, so we will improvise. We'll huddle together. I think we have to make love to this mic so you can hear us. Yeah. Right? Does that work? Okay. All right. Now, Matt took charge as team lead for the Quad. How many of you don't know what the Quad is? Everybody being so shy. So we had an event on the Quad at the World Affairs Council in 2023. Okay? Matt, can you briefly tell people what the Quad is and what India has to do with it?
Yeah, so I work for the U.S. Department of State. I'm a U.S. diplomat. My portfolio this last 6 months has been the Quad. I, for 3 years before that, worked on China, and in particular, working with India on China. But the Quad is a diplomatic partnership or diplomatic grouping between the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. This grouping goes back pretty far. its first rendition took form about 20 years ago after the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami of 2004, when Shinzo Abe basically proposed this. These four countries would get together for humanitarian and disaster relief in response to the tsunami. However, in subsequent years, Australia backed out of it, and then it was revitalized again in 2017 by President Trump. Through the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, and the Biden administration, and now into the second Trump administration, the Quad has ramped up on several different levels. We have a range of initiatives in the maritime security space, in economic security space, critical and emerging technologies. There have in the past been a lot of public health cooperation projects. It is called the Quad because the focus is these four countries, our four countries, are working together on issues to support stability, security, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. Secretary Rubio on his first day as secretary, first full day as secretary, met with the other three Quad foreign ministers in Washington. That was a meeting that he and the President Trump both wanted and set up. I was out there in Washington prepping his team for that meeting, and we're off and running on Quad, maybe even faster and harder than before. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. So imagine within hours of being sworn in as Secretary of State, former Senator Marco Rubio chose his first meeting to be with the Quad. To everyone in this room who's sophisticated about world affairs, that's kind of surprising, right? For the Secretary of State to not turn to the Ukraine issues, the Gaza issues, the neighbors, Canada and Mexico, the NATO countries, but go with the Quad. In addition, India's Foreign Minister, S. Jaishankar, was invited to the, inauguration. And Mr. Jaishankar had a front row seat while he was there. On the very next day, he met with the Senate Majority Leader, he met with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the National Security Advisor, and a number of other senior officials. So he got the royal treatment, which is again unprecedented for a country like India to receive that kind of attention. Okay? And I think you'll be hearing a lot more about India in the months and years to come. And this is not a step change with the Trump administration now. This is something that has been building up really as a matter of fact in the last 20 years. Okay? I want to ask you another question, Matt. And remember, he's a State Department employee, so you can ask him any question, but he may not answer all your questions, and you have to respect that. Okay? So, people in India often say one party, the Democrats or the Republicans, are much more inclined to support India, but I think the truth is slightly different. Right? What do you see within your reading or within your view, what you can say about the support for India between Republicans and Democrats?
I started working at State during the first term of Barack Obama, and that has nothing to do with anything. It's just when I started. So I've been through, I guess, three different presidents now, and only the last 4 years, though, have I been working on anything related to India, and I saw very intensive interest from both the Biden administration and now the Trump administration and their secretaries of state in exploring a wide range of security and economic matters with India, and I think with a focus on, again, shoring up a more stable, more secure, and more prosperous Indo-Pacific region, which reflects back on our own security and prosperity. In Congress, in July, a Quad caucus, a bicameral and bipartisan Quad caucus was launched with pretty equal enthusiasm by both parties. I mean, sorry, these are the words of a diplomat here, but I think particularly with India, there has been a lot of bipartisan interest in diving into that relationship. And when I worked in our China office, I was working on China-India issues, we found, maybe even the last 4 years, with some border issues and other things that were happening, there's a lot of interest on the side of India as well in speaking more with as far as the US go.
Thank you, Matt. So, the term security is often encompasses defense and military issues, right?
That's definitely a big part of it. Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so I know that Rafiq has done some work and has some thoughts on defense collaboration between the two countries. Do you want to start with defense acquisitions first? Because here in Southern California, we have certainly been the beneficiaries of that, right? Long Beach is not so far away, and the C-17 aircraft were manufactured there at one time. India is the largest owner of the C-17 aircraft other than the US Air Force. So lots of jobs here in our backyard were supported by taxpayers in India. But to tell us,
India-US cooperation on defense covers acquisition, localization, and technology transfer. Now, when it comes to purchases of American-made weaponry, there is no dissonance between the two countries. India has a large shopping list that it's slowly trying to fulfill. I mean, clearly there are problems with that because the long dependence on Russian or Soviet equipment. Even now, maybe about 70% of the equipment in use by the Indian armed forces is of Russian or Soviet origin. But it's not the case that of import. The component has now gone down to 30%. And much of that difference is made up by imports from the United States. So from that point of view, it's a very good relationship. Now the second part of it is making locally, maintaining American equipment locally. For example, India would like naval fleets to come to their maintenance, repair, and overhaul operations to India. So that's one aspect that there's some interesting discussions I can tell you about, but where there's not a complete agreement. And the second area is defense technology. So, India recognizes that if it wants the best, it has to come here. And American companies from here are keen to deliver that technology to India. But the issue of IP protection, intellectual property protection, is quite serious. There is a view in the United States that the Indian defense establishment, which is largely still public sector driven, is corrupt and is also very much subject to Russian influence. So American firms are scared that if they deliver their technology to India, it will not be well protected. And the Indians recognize that. They also don't have the certain levels of skills required to be very sophisticated manufacture. So this is an example of an area where with good intent on both sides, the outcomes sometimes are difficult to attain. I mean, when I was last in India 2 months ago, it was quite clear that the Indians were extremely upset with the Americans for what they felt was stalling. The Israelis give us their technology, the French give us their technology. Why not the US? Russians, of course. I tried to point out to them, the Americans are catering to a global market. We are a small proportion of that market. They need to protect their technology in such a case. In the case of Russia, Israel, and India is their largest customer, so they're much more willing to give up that technology. So anyway, that's an example of the things that are going.
So, regarding defense acquisitions, some of you might know that General Atomics down in San Diego has sold their most advanced armed drones, the MQ-9, for a $4 billion purchase by India. And some of those drones will be manufactured by the Indian public sector entity, Sun Aeronautics. And sometimes the State Department and Department of Defense cleared General Electric to share its technology to build the jet engines for the Indian combat aircraft. Okay? So these are unprecedented things that have happened just in the last few years. And clearly there are some obstacles to be overcome, but things are moving forward. The other aspect, now people have questions, so yeah, please bring them up. We want to get the audience questions involved as soon as possible. But let's talk also about the aspect of military cooperation between the two countries. Okay? So the US and India together has held more military exercises in the last, I would say, 8 years than any pair of countries. Okay? Indian soldiers come to Alaska to practice. American ships and planes work together in the Bay of Bengal, even in the Pacific Ocean, for the trials. And Matt, can you talk a little bit about that?
This is more sort of depending on wheelhouse, but yeah, I think we so when we have diplomatic meetings and talk about Quad, we have for now kept our joint exercises sort of separate from that. Procurement does come up in Quad discussions, and I do want to. So yesterday, President Trump had a call with Prime Minister Modi. What the White House released in terms of the readout of that discussion, I think points to what they may discuss in an upcoming meeting that's referenced in that call readout between Modi and President Trump at the White House. And they said that they have plans to meet at the White House relatively soon. Media reports put timeline on that. I'm not going to put a timeline on that.
President Trump said maybe in February.
All right, I won't confirm or deny that. But yeah, so very soon our two leaders will have a meeting. But procurement does come out in that call readout. So this is from the White House readout. The president emphasized the importance of India increasing its procurement of American-made security equipment. But then that's also coupled with a comment from the White House and moving forward a fair bilateral trading relationship. So these things are all going to be part of negotiation, it appears, the way President Trump's approaching it. In terms of how our joint exercises go, yeah, this has been going on for a long time, and this is kind of just in a technical flow. I mean, these are our defense apparatus work on these joint exercises, have been working. That's less that responds less to like the vicissitudes of the diplomatic discussions or even the leader discussions. I think, though I can't be certain, I imagine as our leaders talk more that those will only continue to potentially ramp up. So yeah, beyond saying they happen, that's really all I can comment on for the exercises. But in the call, procurement did come up, and that's definitely going to be mixed together with trade parameters, probably based on the readout.
So we'll get to the trade issues in a little bit, but let's talk about another term that the Quad uses all the time: a free and open Indo-Pacific, right? And the 4 members of the Quad are all large democracies: Japan, Australia, the US, and India. Right? So that is what is bringing the countries together. And India has been very particular about the language being used to describe the Quad. Okay? Because in the beginning it seemed to some, and particularly I think to Australia, which has tremendous trade with China, okay, that somehow the Quad was going to be an anti-China kind of group. And India has been very particular right from the beginning. See, I can speak freely since I don't work for the State Department. Okay. India has been very particular not to use that kind of language. Saying we are for things, we are not against these. That's what India stands on this. So, Rafiq, my question to you is, when we talk about free and open, okay, what is India's role going to be in promoting peace in that region?
Free and open, I assume that means there's no charge. The thing is, if you read the Quad readouts, and I think I haven't read them in the last 3 or 4 months, they're all about ASEAN centrality, right? There's must make ASEAN as central to this process as possible.
Through September.
Last September.
Just the last one was relatively short.
This raises the question, what do we mean by ASEAN centrality if not a single member of ASEAN is part of it? It also raises, I did some research last year with policymakers in Australia and Japan, looking at the issue of China's intentions towards Taiwan, intention or plans in the event of a cross-strait conflict, what would Australia and Japan do? And what came out regarding the Quad is that, and again, as a researcher, I have no problem speaking freely, there's a great reluctance on the part of Australia to follow through with the Quad, because they feel that if their security is ever threatened, it's only the United States that's going to come to the aid of Australia.
Microphone close.
If Australia's security is threatened, only the United States is going to come to the aid of Australia. India and Japan are not. So, and the reason is obvious. India will not do it because of its 2,000-mile long border with China. And recently it's patched up relations as well. Japan will not do it because they are much closer to China and are worried about an attack. And China's made it very clear that they're not going to hold back if Japan joins against it. But actually it's so interesting because many of our respondents told us that really speaking, China doesn't care about the Japan relationship at all. Because they don't care because they realize that Japan is a US ally. So why bother? Let's have a transactional, technology-based relationship, and then we forget them when they become angry with us. But the basic point, I think the Quad still has to mature as an organization. It explicitly says this is not a security grouping, but one gets a sense that behind closed doors they mainly talk security issues. It says we want to do vaccine supply, we want to do disaster relief, multilateral levels to do these things. Why not the WHO, for example? So these are some of the issues that I think tell me, sign to me that the Quad is still an immature organization.
You mentioned the WHO, and one of our audience members has a question about that. What impact does the US pulling out of the World Health Organization have on its relations in the Indo-Pacific? Either of you want to take that?
Right, I saw this other question. I'm already thinking about that one. So no, we don't need to start with. We'll get to that.
I have to hold the mic when saying stuff that you do not agree with.
That's diplomacy.
Hold the mic. So the question is, what does America's withdrawal from the WHO, and not for the first time, as you know, have to do with the implications for the Indo-Pacific? Well, it's clear that healthcare is a big priority now for the countries that constitute the Indo-Pacific. And I want to add, Gunjan, that you mentioned that the official name is Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific to us seems more like a maritime expression, where Asia-Pacific is more including the landmass. So, for example, Asia could include Afghanistan, some countries of Central Asia. So I don't think that concept has lost its relevance. It exists, but for a different purpose. By the way, Gunjan is asking all these questions. Does anyone know how the name South Asia came up? How old is it? So it's a 1950s invention of the State Department. So before that, there was, the British did not divide up the world in terms of defense units. There was CENTCOM and PACOM and so on. So from that context, South Asia was in. And coming back, so healthcare, particularly with the pandemic that we saw with COVID, is a priority for Asian countries. Now, to date, they have relied largely on the WHO. I think they would have no objection to relying on anyone else that could deliver. So I think if the US withdraws from WHO, it would make more sense to me if along with that some solution, maybe through the Quad, could be offered instead. Otherwise it gets countries in the region feeling that well, we need help and we're not going to get it.
Thank you. Thank you. So here's a question from Ramsey. Ramsey, where are you? Thank you for that question. So what was India's secret of success from going from a poor country to the sixth richest country in the world? So let me clarify that a little bit. So India is, by GDP, India has the fifth largest GDP in the world. Okay? This year it's likely to overtake Japan, so that only Germany, China and the US will have the larger GDP. Now what do you mean by rich? Okay. Is it per capita income? Is it the gross product of the country? Okay. And I think Ramsey is referring to the GDP. The GDP is large, but so is the population, right? So the ratio of that, it doesn't turn out so well for India. About 700 million Indians live below the poverty level. I'm not the first to say this, but for any truth about India, you can say the opposite truth, and both will be true. I'm sure you heard about the wedding of Mukesh Ambani's son last year, right? They probably spent $200 million, and they got Rihanna to perform. Earlier he had Beyonce to come and perform in India, right? 150 aircraft landed in this little town called Jamnagar, and you think India is a very rich country, right? Mukesh Ambani, in fact, is going to just announce he's going to build the world's largest data center in Jamnagar. 3 gigawatts of power will be consumed by that data center, right? But on the other side, next to Mukesh Ambani's palatial $1 billion home, there are people sleeping on the street who don't have a home. So India is a land of contrast. So the secret of India's success, let me try and answer that, and then I'll let our panelists add something. So if you ask this question in India, they would say, this is just the return of India, it's not the success of India today. In 1700, India was one of the richest countries in the world. Then this small band of Englishmen came to the country, and over 200 years, they reduced India's contribution to GDP, world GDP from about 20% down to 3% or less when they left in 1947. So in the last 70 years, India has tried to claw back its what they consider its rightful position. Okay? Now, why has this happened? You know, you can attribute liberalization, you can attribute recently Prime Minister Modi's success, and all those are true. But really, the driving force is Indian entrepreneurs and Indian executives. Okay? You see the entrepreneurship everywhere in India, and you see Indian executives right here, right? The CEO of IBM is an Indian American from my alma mater, the IIT Kanpur. The CEO of Google is also of Indian origin. These are all people, by the way, who came in on H-1B visas. So keep that in mind too, right? But that is what is driving the success of India. It's the hard work and the initiatives of people who are born there. Okay? Does that answer your question, Nancy?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Anybody want to add something to that?
So what I'd like to add is, what to me is remarkable is that India went from being a poor and relatively unrecognized country to be a very powerful country without the richness being added to it. Otherwise, it has become powerful before it became rich. If you look at any measures of power, India is now in the top 10 in the world. Some of that has to do with military power, some of it has to do with the backing of the United States. But I think it's more than that, It's not that, I'm going to slightly differ with Gunjan. I think entrepreneurship is important. What has really changed, and I give Prime Minister Modi, despite his terrible faults in other areas, great credit for this initiative of making sure that the poorest of the poor had access to clean water, sanitation systems, bank accounts. Everything provided at very low cost. So, for example, the entire banking system in India runs on a universal payment interface that is owned by the government of India. It's free, it works very well. All the IT talent of India is available to maintain and develop it. And it's completely revolutionized how business gets done. we now have farmers who never had bank accounts for generations suddenly able to transact through the system. We have a mobile telephony that works very well. So I think it's a ground up thing that really began with the Congress in 1991 and took its time to flower, and that has made the big difference. And that's very important because it means it's sustainable. See, the favor of the United States or the size of the military budget, these things will keep changing. But the character of the people, as it has been affected by these fundamental social welfare programs, is, I think, the remarkable thing about it.
And the welfare programs, by the way, include something called Ayushman Bharat, which is the world's largest healthcare program. 600 million people signed up. India's version of Medicaid or Medi-Cal, as we call it here in California. Is India a difficult country to do business with? Regulations, bureaucracy, etc. Again, the 200 years of British rule left a complex web of red tape. And when they left, Indian bureaucracy has perfected it. So the current government, though, is trying to reduce the burden of regulations. And I'll give you a personal example. One of our vendors in India needed to pay us. Okay? And for that, both the US government and the Indian government needed paperwork. Okay? I had to get what's called a tax residency certificate from the Internal Revenue Service. And the magnificent Internal Revenue Service requires you to fill out a paper form, write a check, mail it to them, and 2 months later, if you're lucky, they send the tax residency certificate by first-class mail, and hopefully the US Post Office, with its wonderful Postmaster General, actually delivers it to you. Okay? We had to file some paperwork with the Indian government, Form 10F, all done online on a Sunday. Okay? I was done in 45 minutes. I needed help from an Indian colleague, so I couldn't understand what they wanted. But it was done in 45 minutes. I had the certificate, I emailed it to whoever needed it. So e-governance has become a big part of the way Indian government runs. You want to establish a company in India, now you can do most of the paperwork online. Okay? There's still a lot of bureaucracy, don't get me wrong, but it has changed quite a bit from what it used to be. Okay? Rafiq referred to the digital payment infrastructure, and that makes it easy for payments to be transacted. But what it has also done is people who had no way to get a loan cannot document their income because it's all going to the bank. So they can buy land, they can buy automobiles. Okay? So that wasn't available to a big chunk of the population. And by the way, once you get all the money into the bank, the Indian government knows how much you're earning. So they get their fair collection of income taxes and indirect taxes. Okay? So Indian tax revenue has been going up much faster than the growth of the Indian economy, because it's very inconvenient for Indians to be dishonest about their income. Okay? So that's been a huge accomplishment of the Modi government. Partly again going back to your question about how India has become richer than it used to be. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about trade. Okay? And then I'll get to the hot questions about what has been happening today. I mean, these days you wake up in the morning, I have a Google alert on the word India and Google News. I used to get like 1 or 2 a week, and now I get 20 or 30 a day. So we'll get to some of them. Okay? When I started my company, Amritt, in 2002, India was the 25th largest trading partner to the US. Belgium had more trade with the US than India does. And bilateral trade means imports added to exports. So both trades going in both directions. Now India is the 9th largest trading partner to the US. And for India, the US is its largest trading partner. Okay? For services as well as for goods. Okay? India imports goods, exports goods. The US exports services to India too. So it's not a one-way street either. So can either of you address what you think has caused that acceleration in the last 20 years?
Just on the regulatory question that Gunjan answered, it's not an easy country to do business. India, if you want to go on the ground, transfer your funds there, set up a plant, it's a myriad and a fairly corrupt system still. But there's been an improvement. So, from that point of view, that's right, quite a sharp improvement. But still, we've been talking to some of the defense companies about what they're doing to set up in India. And for them, it's kind of a very difficult process. So coming now to the issue of trade, what has changed? When India, now again, put in perspective, I was just telling my colleagues earlier, that Vietnam exports 3 times as much to the US as India does. Okay, so now, people thinking that China's manufacturing capacity could be taken over by India because of the geopolitical rivalry between the US and China, that's not going to happen so easily. At the same time, trade has gone up sharply, as Gunjan pointed out. And the driving force is simply liberalization, in my opinion. You now have people who are able to do their business without too many checks and balances. I'm sure Gunjan will raise a question of why Trump then calls India an abuser of tariffs, but I'll wait for that question from you. But the reality is that there's a lot of distortion also in the pricing system. Because of subsidies at the state level, you have industries like textiles, which are at one level completely uncompetitive, just because the relative prices of inputs have been distorted by subsidies. So, these things I think need to be kept in mind. But still, the increase I think has largely been due to the liberalization process.
Yeah, liberalization started in India in 1991, and both governments, whether it's the Congress side or the BJP side, successively become more and more liberalized. Although I would say in the last few years, this current government has started to favor some of the largest companies. Now that is something we all know very well in this country. Okay, there have been certainly tens of billions of no bid orders given to the likes of Lockheed Martin and Halliburton, right? So, I used to be very coy about this when people ask me about comparing India and the US. Okay? Yeah, certainly there's a lot of corruption in India. Here in the US, corruption wears a $3,000 suit and has an office on K Street. Okay? So it's really no different. There are ways to influence the government. The ways in India are different from the ways here. So here in the US, we look at India and we say, oh, that's not right. Well, when Indian companies want to come to the US, and did you know that the world's largest producer of aluminum is an Indian company in Hindalco? They own the aluminum production in the US and Canada. Right? So when these companies come to the US, when the State Bank of India wanted to open a branch here in California, it took them 4 years before they could do that. So we have our regulatory hurdles here as well. Okay? Not to say one is better than the other, they're just different, but the hurdles are absolutely there. Do they want the Quad involved in any conflict with Pakistan or Bangladesh? I'll answer that, no. Absolutely not. Okay? And there's no conflict with Bangladesh, there's just a little bit of a tiff. It's like the tiff we have in Canada right now. Right? So don't worry about Bangladesh. We're working on a program about international relations and space. With the space programs and private companies in India and the US work together. And this is from Jane, so we got to give it serious attention. So first of all, how many people in the room know about something called NISA? Okay, just a couple. So NISA stands for NASA, ISRO, Satellite Aperture Radar, forget the last one. It is a collaboration, equal collaboration between NASA, but specifically with JPL in Pasadena, right here in town, okay? And Indian Space Research Organization. They have built the world's most expensive and sophisticated Earth observation satellite. Over $1 billion, the satellite will be launched from India. It has 2 instruments, one Indian, one American, okay? And this will look at the Earth. It will turn back at the Earth and look at changes in the Earth up to a few centimeters. And it will map the entire Earth, I think, every 14 or 15 years. Looking for changes in forest cover, looking for movement in the oceans, the ice caps, the icebergs, all of that. So big effort on tracking climate change and the impact of those kinds of things. And They went to India because this program would not have happened otherwise. It was on the national program, the project list for many, many years, and it kept getting deferred because the budget couldn't afford it. So India stepped forward, and they're launching it. They're putting their own instrument, and it should happen very soon. This will be in the news again once the launch happens. So India has also announced a program to privatize its space industry, which is, if you had asked me 4 years ago, I would have said never, it's not going to happen. Okay? The guy running that program is Pawan Goenka. He just got the Padma Shri Award, like a Medal of Honor, on Republic Day 2 days ago. And he's quoted in my book on doing business in India. He used to work for General Motors. A lot of US-India interaction. And then he designed the most successful SUV that was sold in India. Now he's retired from the Mahindra Group and he's in charge of this space program. So Jane, we can certainly see if we can get you in touch with them. There's a tremendous number of space-oriented startups that are going up in India right now. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So the Quad has done a bit of work on space. And basically, the focus of the Quad is sharing Earth observation data with Indo-Pacific partners, mostly on the disaster prevention side. So early warning system for weather events, whether typhoons or others. There's been talks between Quad partners, including our space agencies, about space debris programs, basically making sure things aren't running into each other, and that could expand further from there. I mean, if you look at space as a sort of maritime area, but those are all in the early stages when it comes to the Quad, but it's definitely something we're looking into.
The Quad become something like NATO. Okay? And I've been wrong many times, but I don't think I'll ever be wrong about this one. Okay? Short answer is no. India is not interested in those kinds of alliances that exclude it from other alliances. Okay? So, NATO's belief is an attack on any one of us is an attack on all of us. Okay? I don't think India is, first of all, its geopolitical position doesn't, support the idea of that you have two hostile neighbors on your northeastern and northwestern borders. Okay? You don't want to poke the bear too much. Right? So I think that is one factor. And the second factor is that so now India has been a big supporter of the United Nations program where soldiers from India have gone all over the place. I think I read a statistic, and Rafiq, correct me if I'm wrong, that more Indian soldiers have died working for the UN than soldiers from any other country. They've been all over the place supporting the United Nations mission. So it's not like India is afraid to go into the regions of conflict for two multilateral agencies.
I would say this is not just one of the four Quad partners who has that view. This is a treaty alliance is not where this is headed. It was never the intent. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. There are tens of thousands of people involved. It may have been somebody's intent somewhere, but it was never. That's not the direction of the Quad. And sometimes Beijing will put out some talking points about Asia, but about an Asian NATO, so not ASEAN like organization, but actually like a treaty alliance like NATO, and that's not where I think any of the Quad partners are looking to take this.
Just to add that out of the 4 Quad countries, 3 are allies of the United States, so they have committed to protect each other in the event of an attack. But sort of, if you read the ANZUS document between the US, Australia, and New Zealand, it doesn't commit Australia to do anything if the US is attacked. It is purely for the area around Australia. But by now, there's an understanding that we are allies in a deep sense. That is, India is the only country that doesn't have that sort of alliance with any of these countries or any other country. I think it's not just fear of China across the border or Pakistan with nuclear weapons. It's also a basic ethos. There's a basic ethos that the world should be multipolar. There's an ambition for India to be one of those poles. So there's a complete difference of viewpoint between the United States and India on this particular issue. There are others, of course, like climate change, but on this basic issue of a multipolar world, India welcomes it, wants to work towards it, and so in that context, there is no question of them ever creating an Asian NATO order.
Thank you. How does the People's Republic of China influence US policy regarding India? I think this is for you, Matt.
In all our bilateral, so it's very diplomatic answer, but in all of our bilateral relationships, the entire regional security picture and global security picture come into play. I was working in our Office of China Cooperation, and we had talks with India where China came up frequently. The bilateral relationship, I think, probably, we're still, I would say the meeting that is happening soon between our leaders happens regardless of what's going on in Beijing. But yeah, China does come up.
Yeah, this is that India kept the United States fully informed when it was negotiating a deal with China recently, which was signed in October. In my conversations with bureaucrats in India, they feel that they are not extended the same courtesy by the US. They point to examples where even President Biden, who cared much more about multilateralism or multinational working than President Trump, they felt had taken actions where they had completely kept the Indians uninformed, where it was relevant to India to be informed about what was going on in China. And most recently, of course, with President Trump, we might see much more of that. He talks about imposing tariffs on India or China. My sense is he doesn't consult with the Indians, finding, or any Indian partners.
So, yes, China figures very deeply in the US consideration about India. I think the fear of China wasn't as concern about China, maybe slightly more moderate. The concern about China didn't exist as it does today in the State and Defense Departments. India would not be getting the kind of attention that it is in Washington today. And I think Indian bureaucrats, Indian planners recognize that. But India has a border to China in Kashmir, in Uttarakhand, and in the Far East in Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh is claimed by China as South Tibet. If someone born in Arunachal Pradesh wants to visit China, China does not give them a visa. They say, you are welcome to come here anytime, because you are a Chinese citizen, in fact. And for that reason, India will not let anybody born in Arunachal Pradesh to travel to China. Okay? So that's the kind of awkward situation that exists. Now, both countries trade a lot. Okay? India's imports from China have gone up in the last several years. As India's economy has grown, there are many things India needs that only China can provide. So it's not, there's some hostility on the military front and concerns on the military front, but on the economic front, there's plenty of movement back and forth of goods and services. I was in Shanghai some years ago, and when I went to the Pudong site, I saw offices of Wipro and Infosys, and a lot of the top IT service providers are there, serving Chinese companies. So there's a lot of trade going in both directions. I don't think we got into all the questions here, but if someone has a burning question that I haven't addressed, please raise your hand. Oh, yes, sir. You have to speak up here now.
Oh, yeah. So you've all heard earlier today about what China's been doing with their latest AI creation that they released. Talk about India's role in countering that and just in the AI space as a whole.
Well, it's not clear to me because I'm not aware of the startup environment in India at the moment on AI. I know they're there. I know they're there because I keep in touch with the Silicon Valley Indian community closely, and they tell me that they are funding AI startups in India. I think DeepSeek is not a fluke. My sense is that you wouldn't have had all the CEOs of all the big companies yesterday, day before, Microsoft and so on, coming on media and saying, oh, it's an excellent product. They've known about it for a while, I think. That they have not changed their plans of what they want to do is, I think, quite indicative of what it means, or what DeepSeek means to them. It means it's there as a piece of the puzzle, but it's not even the major piece of the puzzle.
Some time ago, the IIT Alumni Association invited the CEO of NVIDIA as a speaker, Jensen Huang. And he did not come alone, however. He brought 4 of his senior vice presidents, all of whom were IIT graduates from India. And he had recently met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and he said this recently as well, Jensen Huang is, that India's role in AI will grow dramatically, because to convert what these generative AI and other programs produce, you will need millions of people to actualize it and make it real for the rest of the world. And India has that talent pool, that English-speaking talent pool, that will need to be retooled, because right now they are writing code for SAP and all of that. But, Jensen Huang is quite optimistic that millions of Indians will be working on the applications of AI. Now, I know nothing about DeepSeek, so I cannot answer anything related to that. But Indian companies and the Indian government are really gearing up to perform that exact role. And this is the conversation that happened between Huang and Narendra Modi. And while Modi is not technical, he has a good strategic understanding of these kinds of things, particularly when it involves the potential of employing millions of people. I think you will see India's role in that way to grow exponentially over the next few years. Jake, do we have any? We're out of time now, right?
If you'd like to talk about something else, you can. Otherwise, I can close it up here.
Okay, we can talk about Indian food. Did you guys like the food that the folks cooked up here? Okay, good.
Excellent.
And, thank you very much.
So Gunjan is one of our trustees. We're very grateful to have him. Thankful for putting together this program. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here tonight. I apologize for the AV. I've been doing events my entire career. I was on a panel this afternoon talking about doing events for nonprofits. And I always say that the best training is to take improv classes, because you just don't know what's going to happen. You got to make it work.